to grow along with our planning efforts that is going to advise us in the coming years. And so it's not going to be a static plan. It's very much going to be a moving plan. We know that you attend this meeting with varying levels of review because we only got the plan out here very recently. So after Jeff presents the plan to you, I think we just want to have a discussion about what you need to get comfortable with it, and we want to go over a proposal that we have for you to consider about the next steps in moving this forward and keep moving it along. But we want to make sure, most of all, that this committee understands the significant policy changes that we're proposing. And so we've tried to highlight that in the guide in terms of key factors. But there are a few that I would hope the community wants to talk about. And we can try to highlight those for you today, make sure you get comfortable with it, and then we can talk about that extra process or those next steps in process. And I think I'll close just by talking a little bit about the fact that throughout this long time of drafting the plan, we've had a chance, and you know Mr. Crick was lead on writing the plan. We've had the opportunity to be a part of other planning efforts. The city's park master plan kind of came and went. It started and completed its cycle of planning, and so we were a little bit part of that, coordinated with that. We've been coordinating with utilities and Food Policy Council and economic development arms of the city and county where we can to try to bump ideas off of. And so we've been out there trying to get some feel for where people are at on these things. So with that, if you would hold some questions until the end of Jeff's presentation, and then we can have a focused conversation after that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Steering Committee. So I'm sure you're all very aware and excited by this one. So for those of you who may not have been there the whole time, we'll just kind of go through a little bit of background before we really start going deep into the plan here. The committee started in February of 2014, so it's been about a 3.5-year process to get to where we were at. And to kind of remind you that the public input comes from part of the issue action report and the process that we undertook there. That included the ETC survey, the 8 open houses, the open house survey, which had just over 370 responses. We had the 2 public forums and also the public meeting by the steering committee to kind of vet out all of the items in there. So that is all kind of the background that went into this as part of piecing this document together. The document we have, Thrive, here is a little bit of a change in pace. To give you an idea, it probably says more in the 116 pages that you have in front of you than the 321 pages that Horizon 2020 had in it. So we really tried to boil it down and take it just for its big points. And the one thing to remember with the new draft of the plan is that when Horizon 2020 was written, it had to be the subject matter expert on everything. That's why it was so large. It was 300 pages because it needed to be the expert on every part of our community. We don't really have that reliance on just a single plan anymore. So we took that into account and we started recompiling this document from Horizon 2020's language into what you have today. So the first thing I do want to point out, though, is there is the update guide, which really serves as the executive summary for the document. So this has a couple of the key items inside of it, including we call the crosswalk table. So it walks people from the old document to the new document. So if you wanted to see where Chapter 16 went into, you can now see that it is Chapter 6 inside the new document. So that crosswalk table gives you a guide of seeing what was in Horizon 2020 and how it is moved and relocated to the new document. This also outlines some of the big policy changes that you're going to see between the 2 documents right away. And the other item in there was we tried to put in every point along the way that the new document engages the items that you called out in the issue action report. And just a reminder, there were 19 key items in that report, and we incorporated them all throughout the document as best as we could. So the really big updates that we all talked about for a while, and you'll see in this document, is the reading and continuity of the document. We changed the language, we developed a style guide for it. It has a certain syntax and word use that we carried throughout the document. We tried to take that and not say it like a planner. So tried to make it something that everyday language that anybody could pick up and understand, and hopefully we got there with it. The other thing is thanks to our friends at the county and the city GIS departments, they've worked with us in developing interactive content mapping. We'll show you a few of those later on. So all the maps you see in the document aren't going to be the static maps where you get out the magnifying glass and you hope that that's North 1000 Road, and maybe that is or isn't 1500. Don't have to have that question anymore. So everything is content searchable. You can plug in an address, it'll take you right to that spot, and you don't have to guess on where the line falls anymore. We also incorporate something called reference plans, which was the incorporation by reference that we talked about before. So the community health plan, the food policy plans, those things that are in there that are the subject matter experts now are referenced right into the document for their land use considerations. So as it kind of comes across, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the land use components of those plans are given weight and effect in Horizon, or excuse me, not in Horizon 2020, in Thrive now. It's going to take me a while to transition out of saying Horizon 2020, so we're talking about the new one. And of course, we have some new additions in the plan. The really big ones that we're very excited by is the entire addition of a neighborhood and housing chapter that shows up as chapter 3 now in your document. The other part is local foods and arts and culture take up big portions of community resources. So they are located in that chapter now. So those two parts of our community have a better standing than they had in Horizon 2020. So to kind of go right into the document here as we move along, everything in the document is hinged on the mission vision statement, which we all spent a good amount of time on and kind of basing all the decisions on. Staff used that as one of the key guiding items for drafting the document and making sure everything piecemealed into that. So the live, work, learn, play mentality is incorporated throughout the action items, throughout the goals and the policies. We also amended the procedure to amend the comprehensive plan to bring it in line with what the steering committee had asked for, and also to streamline it from what was available in Horizon 2020. The old way that it used to be amended had a question that was a redundant of another question. So it asked the same question twice. So we tried to clean that up, streamline it, and better fit it to what we have in the new document today. The second chapter in the document is growth and development. And this is actually a combination of 4 chapters that you used to see in Horizon 2020. All of your land uses are in here, so industrial, residential, commercial are housed in here. They're tied to link together, and they're all tied directly into the growth management items. And growth management is a little bit of what we talked about before, but what we did try to do was prioritize the infill development, consider the benefits of annexation to the community as a greater whole, and also tie it down a little bit better to the economic and efficient growth policies that we're seeing in both the city and the county governments. And we wanted to make sure that it was a more measured approach to annexation than what we were doing to date. I'm sure you all remember the old annexation policy was grow and grow and grow at whatever it is. This takes that into account, takes that old annexation policy into account, and then kind of loops it down with what we talked about at the steering committee, with what we heard at the public input sessions, and kind of gives it that measured approach that a lot of people were asking for. So this is one of those things we've talked about a little bit before, but just a quick refresher on it. The plan is kind of contingent on the urban growth area that we have in Horizon 2020, with one notable exception. The Northeast Area Plan actually amends that top, try and point to it here real quick, right here. It amends this portion of it to not be as large because of the floodplain, the water issues that are up in the area, and the fact that we know that infrastructure and utilities are going to be very hard to get out there for an urban development. So other than that, the orange space you see on the map is the current urban growth area. The blue in the middle there is the city limits. That is tier 1 in the new development policies that we have, the growth policy that we have for development. So that is where the prioritization for infill development comes from for both residential, commercial, and industrial uses. Tier 2, which is the green area around the outsides there, is the annexation areas. We kind of lumped it in there. That is the part that we know we can serve with city services, so fire, streets, utilities, sewer, water, wastewater, stormwater, and we can get everything out there. We also have it accounted for in the adopted land use plans of our current sector plans. So these are already areas we have planned out. Tier 2, to give you an idea of that, is about 8.5 square miles and will accommodate about 13,000 people. That puts us right on the normal growth curve that we're seeing for the city and the county currently. So by about 2040, we will be up to around 124, 125,000 people. So the residential land use component, this is where we started really working down through the issue action report. This really accommodates infill development. It puts an expanded emphasis on a variety of housing and types and where it's located in the community. It does also expand accessory dwelling units into all RS zoning district. That is one of the action items that the plan calls for. We had a lot of people ask us that question through public comment. We saw it come up a lot of times, both with the steering committee for alternative housing items. So this recommends expanding accessory dwelling units through the RS districts. It also changes some ways that we do and handle agricultural housing in the county. So it expands the items and the contingencies there, kind of bringing it in line with what we're hearing the community want, and also tying into the fact the way that the economy is changing for that housing item. So before in the residential land use, it was really just a very Lawrence-specific focus. We tried to expand that out and give a county capture to it of what we're seeing on the ground there today. It's also trying to encourage and promote aesthetically integrating and really kind of getting the functional aspects of multi-dwelling housing better into neighborhoods. So it doesn't have to be a large apartment complex. It can take different shapes and forms and different styles to kind of integrate it and modify it into the neighborhoods. The commercial land use is one that we really tried to work very hard at, just simply reformatting it and simplifying it so it was a quick and easy read. And I'm sure you all remember good old Chapter 6 in Horizon 2020. It's upwards of 40 pages long, it's bullet points, it says the same thing in a couple different spots, so you're never quite sure, was it on page 3 or was it on page 6? So what we did was we did a little bit of reformatting to clean that up. It reframes a couple of different items, specifically mixed-use centers in downtown, and kind of reformatting a lot of those items into that integrated neighborhood commercial areas. It also sets the integrating standards for small-scale commercial, including in rural commercial, which we've actually branched out into its own category now. It does maintain nodal plan development, which is what we've been doing for quite a while now, but it does hinge that nodal plan on the same threshold as a staff market study for retail in the city. So the 100,000 square foot requirement for retail market study also now requires a nodal plan to come along with it. So to give you an idea of that reformatting you see in commercial, one of the big items we did change was the introduction of the criteria table. This takes about 7 pages of bullet pointed text that you see in Horizon 2020 and reduces it down to 1 page. It's very easy to look at, very quickly able to read, and you can very quickly identify what scale of commercial we're talking about. So it does define the design standards, which will have a separate section in the document, so it's kind of a quick access to it. But it also kind of lays it out the intensity levels that the comp plan has always identified them to be. We also did change 2 of the names around to make them a little bit more clear to the public on what they were. So what was inter-neighborhood commercial has now been branched out into small neighborhood and large neighborhood commercial. And this is a little bit of a tie to kind of bring everything cohesively back together with what we had in Horizon 2020, but to also then kind of reintegrate commercial, which was part of your issue action report, kind of integrating that back into the development pattern. So that was the method of doing those 2 styles. Industrial land uses, we just really kind of wanted to do a very simple thing here, and that was really clean it up and kind of update it with what we know has changed a little bit in the community. So the design standards are clearer. We've changed the way the retention and development was handled in this, so it kind of prioritizes those existing spaces and trying to find a better use for them as they go forward. And it works on kind of establishing the basis of a retail market study, but for industrial. So it'd be an industrial site inventory where planning staff would go out, track, see how much land is available, what it is accounted for, and then try to figure out the vacancy rate inside of those structures as best as we can. I'd like to be able to say we have that all figured out at this point in time, but right now we don't have all the mechanics of the industrial site survey worked out, but we're mimicking it on some of the ones we've tried and true in the community for retail and for multi-housing. So something we're still kind of working our way through ourselves. Chapter 3 is neighborhoods and housing. This is the one I mentioned earlier that is an entirely new chapter of the document. This again just really takes a lot of the criteria that you saw scattered throughout the document, both in the residential, in the neighborhood section, in the smart code section, in the environment chapter, puts it all together and streamlines it and orients it for neighborhood use. So again, it's going to be kind of prioritizing for a different aspect of our way we're going to handle things. It sets the foundation for aging in place and universal design. So the building codes to kind of let people age in their neighborhood is being set up and proposed inside this chapter in the comprehensive plan. And the design, it recommends going for design guidelines for stronger integration of infill into existing neighborhoods for different types of infill, so commercial, residential, multifamily. It's kind of going in that line. The other item it really integrates very well is the action that's going on with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. It kind of takes the information and the policies that are being adopted by that body and incorporates it into the plan. Transportation is one we really didn't have to change too much for. That was simply, we're going to maintain Transportation 2040, the Metropolitan Planning Organization's regional transportation plan, as the backbone for the transportation decisions. The one thing we did change in this chapter in the comprehensive plan was we gave it stronger linkages to the land use component and to the growth management component that we've put into chapter 2 here. So in Horizon 2020, it just kind of gave you a blanket reference, provided some very high-level steps. What we tried to do was integrate action steps and objectives into this chapter that bring T2040 more in line with our land use. So a direct linkage between one T2040 plan and right into the plan for Thrive here. So stronger linkages all around in that one. And just to let you all know, Transportation 2040 is a 5-year plan. It's updated by the MPO. They're also undergoing an updating process right now. So we expect a little bit of possible changes in the linkages, but we're working that through as it becomes available. Economic development was one we heard quite a bit about, and I'm sure you all remember in the issue action surveys and an entire ETC survey about jobs and employment and industrial action. We didn't really want to kind of take what was in the document in currently its form and just bring it right over. So what we wanted to do was really align the efforts with what we're seeing in the community elsewhere. So that is what this section does, is it really aligns with our partners in the community and tying into the way that we're seeing those changes come through. What we did focus on, based on some of the partner recommendations and documents that we had available, was the workforce development and just retaining, attracting, and striving for those emerging economies in the community. So we don't really go down into the specifics that you would have seen in Eco Squared and some of those languages, because we know that's got to be fairly fluid. We want to make sure that we're not kind of crossing the lines with our partners in that respect. So that's why you see the changes in the document that way. But it is really setting it up for what's next. We're trying to be ahead of it in what we're going to be doing for the next economy that the Lawrence and Douglas County area sees. Natural resources. This was the test chapter. I'll be honest with you. This was the one that we took out first, and we brought it to you and said, do you like the format? Do you like the way that we're lining this out? So it was the test subject. But we went in there and we tied it back together. We cleaned it up a little bit and kind of brought it back into a whole like we did with the rest of the document. It does contain stronger floodplain protections, which we've heard about throughout the process. It does recommend a climate change adaptation plan, which is something we heard about through the STAR reporting, and we've also heard about in previous other items. And it expands the definition of sensitive lands to kind of encompass a broader range of things that we're seeing throughout the community. So it includes things like floodplains and floodways, native prairies, endangered species habitat, and forests. So not just urban forests and canopies, but also the rural stands of trees that we have available that have been there for a long time. So that definition kind of branched out and expanded a bit. Community resources has become the home to a couple of different ones that you would have seen as a normal chapter in Horizon 2020, specifically like historic resources and parks, recreation, and open space. They were very similar in the way that they acted and reacted in Horizon 2020, so we thought it was best to bring them under one heading, link them together, because they all kind of have that same give and take effect with a land use decision. So historic resources actually took the draft chapter that was never formally adopted and the currently adopted chapter, put those two together, and then took out the parts that was extraneous or that we knew were not really there and available to us anymore. So we kind of worked the draft into the existing document a lot stronger. Parks, recreation, and open space. The big change with this one, at the recommendation we heard from a couple different levels, was to include agricultural as an open space land use type. Before it was just kind of left out in it was a quasi land use in the way that Horizon 2020 kind of went about it. It was open space, but it was production. So we decided, let's give it its own credit. Agricultural land is its own animal. It's a different thing than having a parkland. So let's go ahead and give it its own weight in this plan. Parks, Rec, and Open Space also incorporates the 2017 Parks and Rec Master Plan for the City of Lawrence. But we tried to emphasize the connectivity between what the city is doing with the lands that the county has available too. So trying to strengthen those connections between the spaces that both sides of the government have going. Community facilities is one that is probably changed pretty substantially from what you're probably used to. We're not going to try to say certain things in here anymore that we used to try and say about school locations and things like that, because we know the schools have their own planning items they need to be accounting for. We do know that they are very important to this item, but we're not going to try and govern placement criteria for them as much. It does give a lot of deference to the capital improvement plan and other capital budgets that the city has, and also the county. So a little bit more weight to the capital improvement plans for both governments, also with what we're seeing with changes for the KDOT and state, and trying to give a little bit of leeway in those respects. And of course, it also refocuses more on the land use aspect, where previously this one kind of had to be the subject matter expert for a lot of different reasons. It doesn't have to carry that weight anymore, so we just give it back to where it really belongs the best, with the people who know it the best. Arts and culture and local food are new to this plan, so really we took in the Lawrence Cultural Plan, we took in the food system plan, and incorporated the big high-level land use items right into the document itself here. But they're also a reference plan at the very end of our document, which happens to show up here in the appendix section. This is my favorite section. As you all know, I like numbers and graphs and things that are almost indecipherable, so big fan of the demographics section here myself. Specific land use plans is the old chapter 14, which was specific plans. So the old nodal plans, the neighborhood, the sector plans, they're all coming over. They're all going to be the same weight and effect as they were in Horizon 2020, but we gave them a different name because we're realizing that nodal plan doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So we're going to try and change that nomenclature that the plan has. So specific land use plans is what they're coming over as. And I mentioned earlier with the Lawrence Cultural Arts Plan and the Food System Plan, those are going to be the reference plans that come over. So the ones that have subject matter expertise on land use importance, we're bringing them right into the document. And of course, we also have the implementation section, which is a little bit of a piecemeal. It's still coming together as we're kind of fine-tuning, getting all the points down to it. But these would be the steps and action items you see throughout the document, mirrored right down to this part that provides guidance on how they're doing. And so we expect this to be updated as the plan kind of evolves and goes over time. So it'll tell you this has been achieved, this is underway, we're still working to get to this one, and give you a little bit of guidance on what's really gone on since the last time the plan's been updated. So that'll be at the back of the appendix section. And as you can see here, we went down from about, I think it was 17 chapters down to 8. So lost some pages, we lost some chapters, but I really do think that the material that we have in here is the same material we have in Horizon 2020, just strengthened and tied together in a more kind of cohesive pattern that anybody could pick up, read, and understand what we're going for. With that, I'd be glad to stand for any questions you may have.
As you get into it, I think the significant changes from Horizon 2020 really have to do with how we manage growth. Whereas now our policies are pretty much, if you can afford to grow, if the development community can afford to grow, then we will support that. We have instead put more emphasis on infill, take advantage of the infrastructure we have in the ground now, and then if there's a need, then identify that need to grow out, and then is there a community benefit sort of presented with that need. And so it's putting a little more kind of analysis and thoughtfulness into growing outward in the city of Lawrence. The other thing I think it does is it really strengthens some of the environmental issues, and with the idea that newly annexed land shouldn't go into floodplains. To be honest, we felt that was a safe thing to do with this plan update, because in this tier 2 area where we would anticipate annexation, there's not a lot of floodplain out there. And so what we're trying to maybe propose is beginning that policy shift so that 20, 30 years down the road, we're got that kind of ingrained in the community that floodplain should be an area not touched because of all the impacts it presents for future residents. So those are some of the main changes, I think, in the plan. There's a lot of nuanced changes, a lot of smaller things, the introduction of affordable housing and food policy issues and those kind of things were strengthened. And another key phrase in our plan is says where appropriate for land use planning, because frankly a lot of the reference plans have to do with other things outside of land use planning. But as I envision this plan working, a development comes with some sort of affordable housing component with it, we can look at the strategies of the Affordable Housing Board to advise our planning commission and ultimately city or county commissions on how that all fits together. So those reference plans are a pretty big deal in this plan.
about 1 to 3 acres named for commercial area and small neighborhoods. So what does that mean? Is that a minimum and a maximum?
Yes, it kind of works like a range, and let me see if I can back that up a bit. Yeah, the way that it works in that typical site setting is it's a range in between those numbers. When we kind of went through and looked at what the community already has, kind of that smaller scale items, 1 to 3 acres tended to be the historic pattern you tended to see. And when you go through development and site criteria things, that's about the normal site that you tend to see developing at that level. Bigger than that, you start getting into some other complications with commercial design guidelines. You start talking about higher traffic volumes, drive-throughs, things like that wouldn't necessarily integrate into it. So we tried to kind of narrow that down by the size of the lots, and the size of the areas.
3 acres seems big to me, but I don't know my acreage very well. What would be the size of the buildings on that street?
That, oof,
I have to look at that.
yeah, that may be right, either on just under or just over if I'm picturing the whole site correctly.
3 acres.
I think it may be a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Mm.
Acres,
Yeah, you have to look.
size of the building.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. That helps me. Okay, another question is, under annexation, it said property owners must receive services, city services, so who would pay for that in that case? Would the city provide that, or would the property owners have to?
Typically, a property owner would ask for that service, and if we're able to give it to them, then they pay for the extension to their property.
What if they don't want to?
Well, this assumes that they want the service. What that particular policy was getting at was that the city shouldn't give the service without annexing the property. So we've got a few examples of where neighborhoods or properties pick up the service, but they're not annexed into the property. So while they're paying some fees for service, they're not paying all of the range of taxes to the city.
You mentioned in the neighborhood section that we would maintain the form and pattern of existing neighborhoods. So, please tell us more about that.
That's one of those things that we're probably going to have to take a look at a little bit more of a specific ingrained neighborhood planning level. This plan would not be able to get down into every neighborhood and assess that level. So it's really setting up for a deeper neighborhood plan that comes along the way. I don't know the specifics to it. It would depend on what the neighborhood was needing or requesting or something like that. But what it really sets the foundation to is it identifies the certain qualities of a neighborhood that people find reasonable there, that things that they like about it. Maybe the size between curb to sidewalk, or how close buildings are pushed together or not pushed together. So it could be any number of things. It really just, it's setting up that foundation to say, okay, when we go into a neighborhood, Thrive says we need to respect the pattern, respect that building trend, and that would be integrated into those specific area plans and brings them in more. Horizon 2020 gave some guidance to that, but it didn't give a lot of guidance of saying what the community valued in these plans. It would say, we value residential, or we value a certain type of residential. So in trying to figure out how to integrate things like age in place, or working in multifamily structures in compatible ways, if that, or accessory dwelling units, it's a little bit of that one. The closest thing we kind of have to that right now would be the ORIAT neighborhood plan, where it says these areas are for these types of specific development uses and patterns. This area is very much this character and this architectural style. We kind of envision future plans would have that same mimic and feel to it.
Creating identity with signs and having a gathering space. Again, who would pay for that?
Don't know on that one. I can't answer a financial question for that one, but it would be up to the neighborhood to determine what that would actually be. I'm not going to tell one neighborhood, you get a sign, you get I don't know, a stop or whatever it is, but that's something that kind of comes along. This really just sets up the goal and the objective of saying, identifying that neighborhood identity is important and making sure it's accounted for in the plan is as important as ever.
We do have a development policy that puts the cost of development primarily on development itself, unless it extends into the larger public. So as streets have to go past collector streets or larger rec paths, multi-use paths, then the public at large picks up some of those costs. But these kinds of things with neighborhood identity and such, we're trying to lay the support to have neighborhoods built with better identity. We've got a few of the established neighborhoods that have taken it upon themselves to put out signage and different things. We want to lay the groundwork for that kind of creative placemaking so that they have the policy support for it.
I could see some CDBG monies.
Sure. Sure.
And then the last question is about the environment chapter, which is now natural resources, and you mentioned that it's been simplified. So I'm just wondering what was taken out.
Usually, it was just really shortening up sentences or some of those explanatory paragraphs that used to be in chapter 16. That was really the big change that came out of that one. What we tried to also do was if it said something one way and then tried to say it a second time a different way, we tried to just either streamline that as best we could and put it into one sentence, or try to put it in very distinctly differently from the other one. One kind of comes to mind is it talks about in Horizon 2020 about how you handle things like native prairies and items like that. And then it says almost the exact same thing about 4 pages on, or 4 pages ahead of it, somewhere in there. It's almost the exact same thing, but it's not the same thing. It's just different enough to be kind of catch your attention. So we just try to tighten that language up and not lose anything in it other than just the amount of words and duplication where possible.
So the goals and strategies that were in that chapter have been maintained.
Or if they were ones that we'd already checked off the list, we tried to fold them back in and say, this one's already been accomplished, coming out. Or if there's one where we say, okay, we've done really well over here, but we're really not doing this one over here, then we try to strengthen that one to kind of give it more leverage on what is there. One of those would be like the way that sensitive lands is expanded to kind of meet what the community sees as being a sensitive land now. So that's one way we kind of turn that to kind of fit with today's value.
Question here is economic development. Page 24, it's second goal. 2.2 is to create quality working environments that foster strong sense of place. So we need what do we mean by quality working environments?
Page
40, page 44.
This was one of those things that we heard about, not so much through public input, but as we started going through our partners' plans and things, kind of those documents that we're getting from EDC, the Chamber of Commerce, and those, they were trying to find a way of saying, I may not be getting it fully captured here, but developing that atmosphere that attracts businesses to you. So developing amenities and community items that help them attract people to come to the community to fill those jobs. So it's not just necessarily the workspace, but maybe where the workspace is located, the amenities around the workspace. The one example that we had was, it's great to have an industrial building, but if the building's on the very edge of town, then it's less desirable for workers. They don't really see that as an amenity. They want to work maybe somewhere downtown or somewhere where it's active and they can walk to it. So that was kind of leveraging into that response. Well, it could probably vary from employer to employer and area from area to area. So the county may not have the same needs as the city, and one type of employer may value one space at a different rate. So we didn't want to get too specific and start kind of hemming ourselves into a certain way. We're trying to be very broad in this one because we knew that quality employers and employment retention was a very big item we heard in the ETC survey. It's something we can definitely take a look at if we need to.
Two questions, kind of big picture questions, I guess. Can you point me to where the mission and vision statements are?
Sure. They're in introduction. The live, work, learn, and play are on chapter 1, pages 4 and 5 in the document. And the mission and vision statements are 2 and 3. We put them right as the lead off because that was what we used to set up the entire document. We figured they should be the first things you run into when you open the document. I could.
Just a comment about something very minor, the page numbers. It was just confusing to me that they were on different sides of the page. Because I'm going through it, I'm looking for a certain page, and I'm like, wait, where? I realized that it was, one's on the right side, and the next page is on the left side.
Made for a booklet.
Yeah.
Double
Yeah.
printed.
Yeah, that's true, okay.
Bill, I think we landed on purpose of the plan for that title,
Okay, so is that the
and
same?
then vision, yeah.
And, okay, I think in the update guide, it refers to mission and vision
We
statements.
just got some alignment there.
Correct that, because somebody will do just what I did in Sharon, was the vision statement. The other question I had was, when we started this process beginning of 2014, there was no strategic plan for the city. Strategic plan comes along last year, and they've done a pretty good job online with their graphic, right, of laying out the relationship between comprehensive plan and strategic. Some linkage in the comprehensive plan that does it the other way. How does this shape and form whatever the strategic plan? Just to make that lash up there. I don't know where I would put it, but.
I think that graphic you point to is a nice graphic.
Yeah.
Both worlds of strategic planning, and it shows the relationship of all the different plans that city and county would or could do.
So if we have something like that on the comprehensive plan side, that says this is how it shapes and informs the strategic.
And I think you're right, that interplay between, we have woven in a lot more discussion of CIP planning in this plan than I think is in Horizon 2020, making sure that we keep that strong tie between the two, because as departments put forth capital plan items throughout the years, it will be based primarily on our work here with this plan. Or should be based on this plan. So if we see misalignment on that, then we're not doing something correctly there.
I think this is also a good page to point out some of these little features you may not recognize in the PDF right away. When words kind of show up in the blue here, like specific land use plans, if somebody was to click on that, it will take them directly to that part of the document in the chapter. So whenever that word shows up, it leads directly to those items. And if you want to know more about the county or the city, you can kind of hover over the icons here and they will take you to those pages. So there's a lot of interactivity built into the document. So if you want to know more about land use plans, that link will take you right to land use plans. So this thing really works first and foremost as a living thing. You can click on it, you can resize it, you can change it. It will tell you definitions when you ask for it for the most part. You just have to click on them. The other thing is everything you see, it's usually a photo in here, like the covers of the plans, they are hyperlinked. So when you click on it, it will take you directly to that plan. So if you want to know more about the food system plan, you click on its cover, it will take you to that plan. So.
I really like that aspect of
And then one thing we can also show you real quick is, say you want to know the growth and development map for the city. You click on that, it'll take you, and zoom in, right to the map in here. Click on the map in the PDF. We'll come right out to our GIS systems that we have for the city and the county here, and it will show you all the live data that we currently have. So you can search by an address. If you want to know more about City Hall, you plug in its address, it'll pull it up on the map and tell you where it is. You can click on the layers here It will pop up and tell you exactly what they are. So say you're not really interested in growth tiers, but you want to see what the future land uses are, but you're really concerned about maybe where those commercial nodes are going to be located at. And maybe that street, is it going to be a future thoroughfare or is it going to be a collector? You can turn all of these on and you can click on them. It'll tell you all about them in that respect. So things that are not adopted by the plan, like parcel lines, city limits, maybe how streets are aligned, they will live change as it becomes available on the system. Things that are adopted by the plan, something like the growth tiers and the future land uses, they'll be amended by that, but they can come right into this and somebody can see that when they are changing exactly how much is in that space. So there is as much as interactivity as possible included in all the maps.
So when you read that,
Mhm.
go back to the page that you were reading. When I was doing some column, it would go out of that link and back to where you were the entire plan.
We're working on that one.
Okay, so it happened 3 times, I just quit clicking on links because I didn't know where it anymore.
Well, we tried it out and we realized sometimes it's a computer thing, so you have to hold down control and then click and it won't lose your spot. It'll just open the map in a new tab, but on some computers that doesn't work, and if you're using it on your phone, we're trying to work out all the various devices and how to make it.
I'm glad it's not.
No, it's
Okay.
it's a little technical thing we got to figure out with IT on how to make it do certain things still.
Before we send it out to the public.
Yeah, and yeah, it works different. And I have a Mac at home, and mine will just open it in a new tab. And I thought it would work just fine. And I came to work, and it was opening it in the same window. And I kept it's little details, and I'm not an IT expert. I just tried.
I have a suggestion on the natural resources. I mean, I've all over this here. On the advisory boards, I would include the county's Natural and Cultural Heritage Conservation Council on that, because that's actually that's about the only program that actually does have potential for funding conservation easements and stuff, which this chapter encourages. So not just to limit it to the other chapter. And then in the economic development chapter, I noticed in the sideboard that your advisory boards, you list the Joint Economic Development Council, and I don't think that's official yet, but I think that's probably on its way out. You'll want to watch that and maybe
Yeah,
put that out.
we'll adjust it as things change, but we just try to get everybody in there currently
Right.
for the hold up.
And I think we tried to keep a link to board just once, maybe throughout the document,
Oh, really?
because the Heritage Conservation Council pops up on page 58 under Community Resources.
Oh,
But
okay.
if you think it fits better with natural resources, we can move it.
Well, it's just, it actually has the funding
That
potential
funding
for the
potential.
conservation easements that are talked about.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it does a couple of different, it does both buildings and land, so it kind of,
Now, we'll take your guidance on that, on where the best place for that is.
The implementation chapter talks about status indicators. How do you envision that actually?
Pull that up and zoom in. That's
Red,
a,
yellow, green,
that's a-
percentage, on
probably-
track, not on track?
yeah, that's probably worth talking a little bit about, Bill. Because we gave you a model here on this first one. So, zoom in maybe a little bit more. So, as an example, Jeff can speak to this too. So all of these policies are verbatim from the comp plan. And they were ones that we have gone through and called out as actionable items, something meaningful enough to put in and then track its implementation. So this particular one is create zoning regs to provide guidance and protection for the county's historic unincorporated towns. So we would hope that we would use this sort of canned response in terms of status. Is it been initiated? Is it completed? Is it in progress? Was it determined not to be pursued? Because sometimes we would determine that it's not going to be pursued. And then underneath this, we can put some subcategories about some different things. Maybe it takes 2 different text amendments, or another program, or another body is working on it. It's sort of been built as our communication method with the commissions and with the public on where these action steps take. Is that?
It is, yeah. So one thing that comes along with it, anytime that status indicator is changed or the text that's associated with it changes the date. So it'll tell you that was as of the date that it was issued into the document. So that's why you see it kind of grayed out there with a bunch of zeros, is we've never given it anything to handle yet, so it doesn't know. But if it was to undergo a change and say go from not initiated to completed, that date would come up and say, this was the day it was modified. So it's a live tracker, so it'll follow along in there. The parts where it says 1.3 and it has that page number, it simply goes up into the document, finds that text, and mirrors it right down in here. So that will always match with what's in the document up top in those sections. The part underneath of it, we can add or subtract or modify however we need to do it to tell people really what's going on with that action item.
This was our response to the committee's desire to be able to look back 5-10 years into the plan and say, what have we done? How are we doing with it? Are we on track? So there's a lot of action steps here. One of the things we'll have to do if and once approved is to go and kind of prioritize what that workload looks like in the first year, second year, third year. And commissions usually help us with that effort.
Is that a good place to put the strategic plan, possibly? Because, I mean, isn't the strategic plan get to some of those goals?
It is. The strategic plan is going to be, I mean, currently it's a little bit different plan, and it too can change every 2 years is the idea. And so I mean, I think our idea right now is that each stands on its own, with the comp plan being kind of the larger policy umbrella. And the strategic plan gets tracked actually on its own merits in its own way through the city of Lawrence anyway right now under some methodology. But I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because this is our way of looking at the benchmarking of the plan.
Energy and how we project ourselves in terms of future energy. And I have to admit, I didn't read it word for word, so I hope maybe missed a section. But I think in the natural resources section, there's a bullet that talks about, we recognize the importance of mining and various material resources, and then it alongside that is the oil and gas extraction as something that we promote, support. I didn't remember that oil and gas language from the previous plan, but to balance that, if we're saying that, given everything we know about climate and all of that, is there a part of the plan that shows that we are encouraging renewable energy resources, solar and wind, and that we welcome that as a sustainable, community?
We tried.
What?
Under the next section down, the building section,
Yeah, what page?
6.
53 and 54. They'll go in there. What we tried to do with that language was bring it in line with STAR a little bit more, because they had a little bit, let's say, connected language to it a little bit better. So we tried to bring that STAR language into the section a little bit and try to give it more bite to it than what was there before, and kind of align it with the STAR policy.
Yeah, Commissioner, the policy related to the extraction of local natural resources has to do with some discussions within the last 5 years of some conditional use permits in unincorporated areas that have sought to extract sand and gravel and some natural materials to keep development of infrastructure reasonable to the region. And so we have had some language and some discussion about, well, the comp plan should recognize that natural resources exist and that they're really sort of vital to maintaining reasonable costs to development in the region if they're done correctly and compatible with other land uses. The flip side of that is that as much as we need rock and gravel and sand for roads and bridges and buildings and those sorts of things, our energy consumption is strongly going toward the renewable energy kind. So we're trying to support that as well. What we had found is that the Horizon 2020 was either silent or even opposed to some of that natural extraction, and it's a real challenge to get that land use developed in the county. And so we wanted to support it to the extent we thought it was reasonable to.
Well, I remember all of that. I don't remember oil and gas being part of that list. And I'm not saying that that's, I mean, that we don't control that. That's controlled by the Kansas Corporation Commission.
Right.
So I know that we won't have that fight. But where are you saying the language is on that same page?
Well, so that policy 4 is where you're talking about
Right.
gravel, timber, oil, gas, and then 4.2 is the policy recognizing the need for the extraction of local natural resources.
And then the part about the
It's in
inter-
6.
And then 6 at the bottom of that page
And on to the next.
talks about sustainable development, adopt climate change adaptation plan.
6.4, 6.5, 6.6 really.
Renewable
get that.
energy.
Green building standards and practices, responsible use and conservation of energy and natural resources.
Okay. I don't know if I would be like every other citizen out there who got that far along in reading, but once I saw that list of materials and then hit on the oil and gas extraction, all I could think of was, the fight around that and the impact of that, and then I kind of lost my attention then and didn't go down into the weeds and see the other
Well, there's
more kind of contemporary renewable energy language to kind of balance that. So
Well, we're looking for the input.
Yeah.
This is one of the
yeah.
ways we see it.
It'll be interesting to see what the public
Yeah.
how the public reacts to it.
And some of it are clarified, proper extraction and remediation of these things. And so these kinds of land uses exist. There are rights granted
Yeah.
in our state that
Right.
people do have some rights. So
Scott, one question, Jeff. 6.2 talks about mitigating the impacts caused by noise and light pollution. We've received some communication here recently about LED lighting and the effects of that. Is that going to take that into consideration too?
I think that could be one of those items that fall under this policy. We have to determine, what the impact is and how to mitigate it. And I think that's one of the newer impacts that we're learning about is LED lighting. And I think we can all drive down the streets and see the difference between the LED and the other kinds of lighting to know that some will view it as an impact. So how do you mitigate that?
I find it interesting reading, but, I didn't realize it was hurting me until recently, so.
Yeah.
Question about, 4.3, in the natural resources section. It says document and map active systemic quarries and analyze their impact at operational levels of all sites. What do you see coming from that analysis?
Some of the quarries aren't very active, and so these suspended quarries. And so what we're experiencing right now is that as those get active again, we've been asked by some neighborhood groups to sort of intervene and see if there's some ways to mitigate the impacts to it, whether it's stormwater issues, perceived or real water pollution issues with the heavy equipment out there, a lot of dust palliative and control issues on the roads. The quarry goes dormant for couple of decades and then comes back, it looks like a brand new land use, those sorts of issues. Yeah, and we're trying to build in some better support in our policies to be able to do that. Because again, the quarries have some rights under the laws and that kind of thing, so we're trying to balance all of these things.
So you might allow parcels that have kind of quarry rights that really have been dormant or just haven't started. So neighborhoods might become aware.
I don't know if we've got the detail of it worked out. We may have done some mapping in that regard. Yeah, but it would be, again, be a work item to get to eventually, because they can be impactful.
Oh, yes.
And it's that balance
That'd be a good
between
project, yeah.
recognizing the need for quarries on one hand and mitigating impacts on the other.
Right.
And then dealing with all the legal nuances in between of non-conforming quarries and some that didn't have CUPs, some that had pretty thin CUPs with some pretty thin conditions. And I give a lot of kudos to the quarry operators in the county. They've been very willing to work through the ones we have experience with. They've been good neighbors, or tried to be good neighbors to the extent they can, in my opinion. And I would anticipate that we keep this discussion, going. If you want to talk a little bit about our public input process, that might inform you on other questions to ask.
Wasn't there a draft timeline for public input that
Yeah.
goes over that?
Yes. And we modeled this timeline on what we think have been some successful methodology in dealing with any number of our transportation plans. We've done not only our major transportation plan update, but a lot of mini plans, bikeway planning and transit planning and all kinds of different multimodal planning. And so what we think might be in the interest of keeping this process moving forward is to have you receive the draft today, make a motion to let us get it out to the public for about a 45-day public review comment period. Get all those comments in writing. We very much want to get things in writing so that we can then share it with the steering committee in writing and let you be the filter for how the plan might change. At the same time, you can be reviewing the plan and other stakeholders and bring all that back together after that 45-day period. And you can see what our PR campaign would look like. We'll try to get it out, get the word out as much as possible. We think this video of this meeting is going to be an important piece of information to get out so that they can see Jeff's presentation and PowerPoint on it. Share all the links, do everything we can, and that would happen. Now what I'm hearing would be after we correct our links and fix our links and how it all works in a very digital format, and utilize every means possible. After that, we've kept the date undetermined, but bring the steering committee back, review it against that final look against the issue action report, that final review of public comment and input, your own review, since you're all coming to this at a different level of review, I'm sure, and then ultimately release it for the formal process of Planning Commission, County Commission, and City Commission. And so, I think at that point, the steering committee's work would be completed. You've done some great work to get us to our next comprehensive plan.
So when you launch this 45-day public input period, you're going to be launching it as Thrive.
Yes, sir.
So you're going to have some words in there to communicate how 2020 is no longer out there. It's like we have transitioned to calling it Thrive.
Well, it won't be
Because no one
adopted
will know
yet.
what Thrive is to begin with.
It won't be. We will have to create some language that helps project the understanding of what's happening.
Yeah.
We are looking at a major amendment, really a brand new comprehensive plan to replace Horizon 2020. That's what this has grown into.
Right.
So this would be the comprehensive plan, the joint city-county comprehensive plan to replace Horizon 2020. Horizon 2020 stands until this is adopted, and let people know that it's out for review, and try to give them whatever tools necessary to point them to the guide, point them to the plan itself, ask for input, tell them how they can give that input. We want to do it in a very digital-friendly way so that we can pretty quickly get all the comments together, combine together, and get that out to the steering committee. And then we're just trying to build the whole record so that anybody who wants to see the sausage being made can look at it, see every comment out there. As that moves forward to the planning commission, then that whole record will be there for review.
How married are you or we to that name? I mean, the Thrive kind of came during kind of an awkward little process with the KU students a long, long time ago. It's an interesting word, might be great, but, I mean, is that part of what we would like the public to respond to? Do we want suggestions? Do we want to shut down
Well-
suggestion? How do, because I mean, I know the context of that word in this plan. I don't think a lot of folks outside of this
No.
room will get that necessarily.
I would say staff has had discussions, but
Uh-huh.
we haven't always been exactly
I bet you-
married to that name. There are probably better ways, in that perspective, to look at what's the community's name of the comprehensive plan. We've got a long name, a long formal name for our plan, because it's the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Plan, comprehensive plan. But yeah, we have put together some lists over time and recently even that. But we have to make some decisions quickly because we are getting ready to go public with it. So
It just seems like it's, Horizon 2020 just rolls off people's lips without even thinking. We need, whether Thrive is it or not, I think it would be great if we had a consensus that was our best name before it goes public, or that we're willing to let the public help us name the plan, because if we send it out with Thrive,
it becomes the
we
plan.
kind of own that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we ever made the formal decision that was the name.
Can we hear your other suggestion?
Thrive 2050.
I didn't bring the list, but one idea would be to keep it unnamed and take input.
I'll admit, I like the fact that there weren't any numbers in it. Now, I'm kind of like you. Thrive didn't grab me. In fact, I didn't even know what the hell Thrive was until I
Right.
got to it on the screen. I went, oh, Thrive is the name of it. Oh, okay, I got it. I'd forgotten where it came up from. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I have no problem with indirectly soliciting comments on it. I don't think it's locked in stone at this point.
It
but-
might entice people to be a little more interested, if they
I mean, we don't
had
have
a part in naming the plan.
We don't have a name for the strategic plan, right? I mean, it's just the Lawrence strategic plan,
There you
right?
go.
So,
True. Most comprehensive plans come with a name.
Doesn't
No,
stand
don't.
comprehensive plan.
This could be the Lawrence Douglas County Comp Plan. It's supposed to invoke that.
and I've got no problem with a name for it. But it is in fact a county and city planning document, so it's not just a Lawrence strategic plan.
Right.
Go up.
Keep you out of the
From the standpoint of readability, does Thrive tell us what it is?
I think that's probably a great articulation about.
I mean, it doesn't tell us that it's
Yeah.
our comp plan.
Part of the problem that we've had with it is, we're happy to keep it open and bring that could be your first order of business in October when we get back together to have that, because it may be fun to solicit names and
I
say.
think it would.
I think that
Looking for a
invites
name.
the community to
Make it
care a
kinda
little
fun.
bit more. They might, some folks might have fun and they might come up with a great name.
We'll get our share of smart aleck names, of course, but
Well, sure.
be a fun read.
I mean, if we seek public input over 45 days to something called Thrive, and then we want to change it in October, you know, that's going to be messed up. No one will know what they're doing, so.
Right, and, the transportation plan is Transportation 2040. So you could be as
And it
simple
tells you what
as
it is.
Plan 2040, but we've talked about not having the date in there, but
Can it just go out to the public as draft comprehensive plan?
I think we can make that happen, yes.
Solicit
Solicit names.
appropriate.
I mean, the verbiage can certainly convey that it's an update of the original Horizon 2020 plan launched in '98 or whatever.
So I think our desire today, I'm glad you brought that up. We wanted to change the plan name as well, but our real desire was to get a feel for how you all felt. Were we on target with how you thought the issue action report should be addressed? Are we far enough along to release it to the public? We think that that you should get the public's input before you make your final input anyway and decide what goes in and out of the plan. And then by fall, maybe we're starting down the formal process here.
I, for one, absolutely think it's ready to get public input because it's packaged differently than people who participated in the forums saw it. So I think it's good to get the public input now for, okay, this is the next evolution of how that plan has, developed.
I think you guys have done a great job. It's done a lot of work. I think it's a lot more readable and user-friendly, and I think it's definitely going down the right path compared to what it was. It's not so cumbersome. So. My other question, are we married to these dates? And I have no idea if it's a big deal or not. I just wondered, does that give people enough time? Like, it's still summer, people are on vacation. I didn't know if it should be pushed back a little bit longer. Starting once, like sending it out when school starts or something, or just extending the deadline till the end of September or something.
We could, if we're not too married to it.
So just a little, I don't know how many people are gone and on vacation and stuff, but yeah.
There definitely are some for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
In August,
And then they get really busy for a few weeks.
Right,
And then,
right. That's what I thought, to at least extend it to the, either pushing back the date you release it or extending the
or a
timeline.
60-day window whenever we
Yeah.
end up releasing it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Gets everybody back on vacation and gets them in, the school spirit, everybody's back.
Oh, yeah. I would say at least October 1st. When does school start? It's different than, what? KU's August 21st?
Not September, but August.
Scott, there's another thing on our public relations and getting the word to the university. Somehow that needs to be communicated rather than just the local media, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That and the students. And, to be honest, I've thought a lot about the youth. If this is who we're serving, the high school, middle school youth are going to be the benefactors of this plan. To the extent the school can get involved with helping us get the word out and getting the plan into classrooms might be a fun way to do that too. I think that would be helpful. Trying to hit that whole range of age, as well as we use the trading post at one point to do the issue action report for the rural residents. And if anybody has ideas about getting out to everybody, that would be helpful.
That reminds me of one little detail, but I'm not sure quite how this should get treated, but mention of universities and pictures of Haskell. Lots of representation of the Native American community in Haskell, so that's great. KU's in there. Baker, not so much. I know that's the Baldwin City property and all of that, but it's also a Douglas County asset.
Institution.
Yeah. I just think we probably ought to be careful to make sure that they get representation in there. And I have to say one other thing before we make a decision on dates. One other, given current advocacy and sensitivities and kind of where every community is right now. I scrolled through and looking at pictures and all. I have to say, and we are a pretty white community, no doubt about it. But it seemed like representation of, there's a lot of Native American representation. I didn't feel like I saw very many African American.
To reflect.
I think we need to be
diversity.
really, really thoughtful about that, to make sure our pictures haven't
Sure.
unintentionally shown us to be even more white than we are. However, great pictures. Jeff, I hope you don't hear all of this as any kind of, you did a remarkable job. This is, to think of what you had to work with and what you've created is, still some work to do here and there, but wow, what a remarkable improvement and really, really strong work. And it's exciting to me.
Remember that this is intended to accommodate the next 30,000 people, the next residents. We had a strong growth year, 1.4%, I think, over
Yeah.
the last year. 2%?
1.2?
1.2%, so still growing. So we'll need to accommodate.
There, 2020 never had this kind of visual component to it. And so now there's tons of visuals, all of which are doing a lot towards building passion and energy and everything else for what the words are. And I saw that in there, but that was an excellent point about the diversity.
So I think if the committee has any thoughts, we'll want to see that too. What I think would be most beneficial is if you give us the release of this to the public, we won't change anything until we get you back together in October. And what we will do is add whatever committee member input there is to the packet, probably put that on top, make sure that you get to see everything, and then you'll have a discussion. And if we have to do that over a couple of meetings, that's fine too. This is the time to take our time with it before we get it out into the, and what we hope happens is that all of this work on your level makes it a little bit smoother to get it through 3 different commissions so that it's not hung up in years worth of interplay between that. So we would ask that you all go back to your commissions and advocate for it at that point, if you're comfortable enough to do so. So
at this point then, our direction would be to receive and give the authority to staff to release after accepting further comments from us. Do you
well,
want additional comments?
we would like a motion to release the draft for public comment
Okay.
as we've built the public comment window. And then
With
as
the recommendations that have come
Right.
from this meeting.
to go out to at least October 10th. If we find we're having lots of technical challenges to get the links right and stuff, we'll update you on that. But what I'm hearing is that you'd like at least a 2-month window of public comment. So we'll take that into consideration. And then release it without a name. So we've got to go back. So it won't happen tomorrow. We put August 1st here. It won't happen tomorrow. Take a little time to go back in and get it ready to release it, start our PR campaign, with all of your comments. And then within that public comment window, as you all take a deep dive into the plan, then and come up with any comments, forward them on to us. I think it'd be better to do that than save it for your next meeting. Just another option. But if you have some comments that you're going to want the steering committee as a whole to consider and review, then please forward those on. Gives the public a little bit of chance to look at that input as well. And then we will get another doodle poll out.
So with those comments, are you gonna shoot those out to all of us and somebody shoots it in?
Well,
So
what-
that
what-
we see it all ahead of time also? Is that the plan?
Well, what we'll likely do is gather all the public's comments and steering committee comments and then get that out at least 2 weeks before your October, November meeting so that you can see all the comments. Keep it all kind of very process oriented.
And the intent from the output from that meeting then would be, next step would be planning commission, city and county commission.
Yes.
Is that right?
Will it be edit?
Well, it could be edit, it could be,
Yeah,
it could be
maybe
edit,
another
it could be,
meeting.
Yeah, okay.
right.
I'm sure it'll be an edit.
It'll at least be a discussion because you'll have public comment to consider and then you'll have to make some decisions about do you change a policy, add a policy, delete, add, strengthen.
Scott, if we gave you to August 15th, make your changes, does that help? I mean,
I don't think you're necessarily adopting the dates
Okay.
now. I think if you give us direction to have at least a 60-day public comment window,
Whenever you get it done.
whenever we can get it packaged up and ready to go, that's, I think, helpful to us. And that's what I've heard, is that you wanted that longer than 45-day public comment, and you wanted us to include these other groups. And we can do all of that.
Do you have a way for people without being in process to provide comment after
Sure, and they can give us written comment that we can scan. What we're trying really not to do is go out to the public with we have some limited resources, so we can't really accept invites to go out and just keep presenting this over and over, and then have people give us verbal comments and expect we're going to carry that back to you all. It really needs to be a little more formal at this point, in our opinion, so that people are writing down their comments and giving them to us.
Mike just realized he's likely not
I'm
going to
not gonna get a vote on this.
Oh,
Let's hurry up. Yeah, no, you're right. Commissioner Amix, your probably last formal input would be on sending it up through the 3 commissions.
Okay.
If we can
you
get
can always come to those meetings and provide your input.
You could advocate from the
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
So we need a motion, right?
Yes.
So, anyone succinctly say what Scott just asked us to do?
Motion to receive and to include all of the items that Scott brought up.
Steering committee and public comment period to be
60
60
days.
days.
And I also added the local universities and youth to the public relations campaign.
Just send it out unnamed.
Yes.
Was that a motion? Or was that a suggestion for the wording of the motion?
Well, I'll make the motion behind it.
Okay, I'll second your motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
This is kind of loose chairmanship going on here.
It's a good co-relationship.
Collaboration.
There it is.
Did you have anything?
That's all we had, unless you all have anything more for us.
So our next meeting is probably going to be in October or November.
Yeah. Yep, we'll send a doodle poll out to see what dates, if any, work for you there. I think this one was a ways out there. Last time we got going in March or April to get to this date, so look for that meeting, and please do help us get the word out when you start see our PR campaign going. It's really an important plan for the future generations. We thank you for your time and energy you're spending, and will spend on this. Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.